He had spent 8 years refusing every woman who tried to enter his life. But on the night his exhausted maid accidentally fell asleep in his bed, the most untouchable man in Chicago discovered that the strongest walls are sometimes broken by the smallest mistakes. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Moretti estate, turning the sprawling property into a blur of silver lights and restless shadows. Inside the mansion, every hallway glowed beneath warm chandeliers. Every polished marble floor reflected quiet perfection, and every employee moved with rehearsed precision because everyone understood one unspoken rule. Gabriel Moretti never tolerated disorder. At 38 years old, the white-haired patriarch of one of Chicago's most influential business empires carried himself with a calm authority that silenced rooms before he spoke a single word. Newspapers speculated endlessly about why the handsome billionaire had never remarried, why every elegant socialite, successful executive, and famous celebrity eventually disappeared from his life without explanation. The staff never asked. Questions did not belong in this house. Neither did curiosity. Amara Brooks had learned that lesson during her first week. She kept her eyes lowered, completed every task before sunrise, and treated every expensive painting, crystal vase, and antique table with more care than she gave herself. At 27, the Black Maid worked 2 jobs every day, sending nearly every paycheck to her younger brother while quietly convincing herself that exhaustion was simply another bill life expected her to pay. For 6 straight days, she had slept less than 4 hours each night. A housekeeper had called in sick. 2 charity galas had doubled the workload. Unexpected guests had stayed late into every evening. By the time the grandfather clock echoed midnight through the silent corridors, even her footsteps no longer felt steady. She carried a fresh stack of folded linens against her chest, blinking hard as the hallway stretched before her in soft golden light. Every door looked identical beneath the dim lamps. Her vision blurred for only a second. It was enough. She reached for the wrong brass handle. The bedroom beyond was impossibly quiet. Heavy curtains muted the storm outside, and the faint scent of cedar and old books lingered in the air. She believed she had entered one of the unused guest suites prepared for weekend visitors. Setting the folded sheets neatly onto a nearby chair, she intended to rest for only a minute before returning downstairs. Her aching knees gave out the moment she sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was softer than anything she had ever felt. She leaned back without thinking. Her eyelids closed almost instantly. Within seconds, sleep claimed her completely. Nearly 40 minutes later, the front doors of the mansion opened. Gabriel stepped inside after another endless evening of meetings, removing his rain-soaked overcoat as his security team quietly dispersed through the entrance hall. He climbed the grand staircase alone, expecting nothing more than silence at the end of another impossible day. But when he slowly pushed open the door to his private bedroom, he stopped without breathing. Someone was asleep in his bed. The room remained perfectly still, as though even the storm outside had paused to witness what happened next. Gabriel Moretti did not move. His hand remained on the polished brass doorknob, while the quiet rhythm of the young woman's breathing became the only sound inside the room. For a long moment, he simply watched. The security cameras, the guards stationed throughout the estate, the endless layers of protection surrounding his life had all failed to prepare him for something so ordinary. A woman was sleeping peacefully in the one place no one had entered without permission for nearly a decade. The silence behind him did not last long. One of his senior security officers reached the hallway after noticing the bedroom door had remained open. His polished shoes stopped against the hardwood floor before he lowered his voice. "Sir, is everything all right?" Gabriel lifted one finger without looking away from the bed. The gesture was enough. The man immediately fell silent. Another guard appeared behind him, expecting an emergency, but both men froze after following Gabriel's gaze. Their expressions shifted from confusion to disbelief. Every employee inside the mansion knew the history of that room. Housekeepers cleaned every inch while Gabriel worked downstairs, never after sunset, never alone, and never under any circumstance approached the bed itself. Fresh linens were changed only after direct approval from the head of household staff. The room had become less of a bedroom and more of a quiet sanctuary that nobody questioned. Yet there she was, curled beneath the edge of the comforter without realizing where she had wandered. One of the guards leaned closer. Should we wake her? Gabriel answered so softly that it almost disappeared into the rain outside. No. The single word stunned everyone in the hallway. He stepped farther into the room, removed his watch, and quietly placed it on the dresser. Amara shifted slightly in her sleep, her tired hands still resting loosely over the blanket, the faint lines of exhaustion visible beneath her closed eyes even in the soft bedside light. There was no calculation on her face, no ambition, no fear, only the unmistakable expression of someone whose body had simply reached its limit. Gabriel noticed details he had somehow overlooked before. The cuffs of her housekeeping uniform had been carefully mended by hand instead of replaced. The soles of her shoes were beginning to separate near the heel. One finger carried a small bandage that had probably been hidden beneath white cleaning gloves throughout the day. Nothing about her suggested carelessness. Everything suggested sacrifice. He remembered passing her several times during the previous week. She had always been carrying laundry, arranging flowers after charity events, polishing silver before sunrise, or quietly helping older staff members finish work they could no longer complete alone. She never lingered. She never complained. She was almost invisible. Yet invisible people often carried the heaviest burdens. Gabriel crossed the room with slow, measured steps until he stood beside the bed. Outside, thunder rolled gently across the Chicago skyline. But inside the mansion the air remained warm and still. A loose strand of Amara's dark curls had fallen across her face. Without thinking, Gabriel reached toward the nearby chair instead, picked up a folded cashmere throw that rested there, and carefully draped it over her shoulders because the room always grew colder after midnight. He immediately paused, surprised by his own instinct. 8 years of carefully protecting the distance between himself and the rest of the world had made simple acts of kindness feel unfamiliar. Behind him, the guards exchanged uncertain glances but remained completely silent. Gabriel finally turned toward them. "No one speaks about this," he said evenly. "If anyone asks, Miss Brooks finished her shift early because I approved it." The men nodded at once. No one questioned his decision. As the bedroom door closed once again, the storm continued outside, but somewhere beneath the weight of another sleepless Chicago night, something far quieter had already begun to change. Morning sunlight filtered gently through the tall windows, painting quiet bands of gold across the bedroom floor before finally reaching Amara's face. She stirred slowly, believing for one peaceful moment that she had somehow slept in one of the empty guest rooms prepared for visitors. Then her eyes opened completely. The carved walnut headboard, the shelves lined with first editions, the charcoal suit jacket hanging neatly beside an antique grandfather clock. None of it belonged to a guest room. Her heartbeat stopped. Every color drained from her face as memory rushed back in scattered pieces. The endless workload, the stack of linens in her arms, the wrong door, the unbearable exhaustion. She sat upright so quickly that the neatly folded cashmere throw slipped from her shoulders onto the bed. Her eyes widened as she stared at it, knowing with absolute certainty that it had not been there before she fell asleep. Someone had covered her during the night. Her hands began trembling. She quietly climbed off the bed, smoothing every wrinkle she could find in the comforter, straightening the pillows with desperate precision as though perfect corners could erase the impossible mistake she had made. Every second she expected the bedroom door to open. Every second she imagined losing the only stable job she had managed to find in years. Instead, the room remained silent. She carefully picked up the folded linens she had abandoned the night before and slipped into the hallway. The mansion had already awakened. Fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen. Gardeners worked beyond the eastern courtyard. Housekeepers polished banisters while speaking in hushed voices. Yet something felt different. As Amara entered the service corridor, conversation stopped almost instantly. Several employees looked toward her before quietly returning to their work. No one smiled. No one greeted her. She lowered her eyes, convinced that everyone already knew. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Evelyn Carter, approached with her usual calm expression. She had supervised the estate for nearly 20 years and rarely displayed emotion. "Miss Brooks," she said gently, "Mr. Moretti approved a late start for you this morning." Amara blinked in confusion. "For me?" Mrs. Carter nodded once. "You were instructed to rest." Those words only deepened the fear growing inside her. Gabriel Moretti did not give unexpected kindness. At least that was what everyone believed. Amara swallowed carefully. Did Mr. Moretti ask to see me? Mrs. Carter studied her for a brief moment before answering. No. Relief and uncertainty collided inside her at the same time. She thanked the older woman quietly and returned to her duties. But concentration had become impossible. Every polished mirror reflected the same anxious expression. Every ticking clock reminded her that consequences often arrived later than expected. Upstairs, Gabriel stood inside his private office overlooking Lake Michigan. A financial presentation rested open across his desk, yet he had not turned a single page in nearly 10 minutes. Instead, his attention drifted toward the security monitor displaying different areas of the estate. One screen showed the west hallway where Amara quietly arranged fresh flowers, carefully trimming each stem before placing them into crystal vases with surprising patience. Another screen showed her helping an elderly groundskeeper lift heavy storage boxes even though she was clearly still tired. She never realized the cameras were there. She never looked around to see who might notice. Gabriel found himself watching without understanding why. His executive assistant entered carrying the morning schedule. Your meeting begins in 30 minutes, she reminded him. Gabriel nodded absent-mindedly. Who assigned Miss Brooks to overnight preparations all week? The assistant quickly checked her tablet. She volunteered after 2 employees became ill. She also requested additional hours every weekend. Why? The assistant hesitated before answering. Payroll records indicate she transfers most of her earnings every month to support her younger brother while he studies engineering at the University of Illinois. Gabriel looked once more toward the monitor where Amara smiled warmly at an elderly gardener after handing him a bottle of cold water before quietly returning to work as though no simple act of kindness deserved recognition. Something about that quiet dignity lingered in the room long after the screen changed to another camera. The afternoon passed beneath clear summer skies, yet an invisible weight followed Amara through every hallway of the Moretti estate. She polished antique mirrors until they reflected every crystal chandelier without a single streak. She refreshed flowers in the formal dining room before replacing faded roses with fresh, white lilies from the greenhouse. She organized the library exactly as Mrs. Carter preferred, aligning every leather-bound volume by height and color. Her hands never stopped moving because movement kept anxious thoughts from becoming louder. Even so, every time footsteps echoed behind her, she expected someone to say that Mr. Moretti wanted to see her. Every unopened door felt like a judgment waiting to happen. Shortly before 3 o'clock, Mrs. Carter entered the library carrying a small clipboard. Miss Brooks, she said calmly. Mr. Moretti would like fresh tea served in the West Garden. Amara's stomach tightened immediately. She nodded without hesitation, carefully preparing a silver tray with loose-leaf Earl Grey, warm scones, fresh berries, and a porcelain teapot that had belonged to the Moretti family for generations. Her hands remained steady only because years of hardship had taught her how to hide fear beneath routine. The West Garden overlooked Lake Michigan, where gentle afternoon sunlight shimmered across the water and a cool breeze carried the scent of lavender through carefully trimmed hedges. Gabriel sat alone beneath a white stone gazebo reviewing several business reports spread across a polished oak table. He did not immediately acknowledge her arrival. Amara quietly arranged the tea service exactly as she had been trained, placing every cup with careful precision before taking one respectful step backward. Sir, she said softly, your afternoon tea. Gabriel looked up from the documents for the first time. His expression remained composed, impossible to read, but there was no trace of anger in his eyes. Thank you, Miss Brooks. She lowered her gaze. If there is nothing else, I will return to work. There is one thing. Her heartbeat quickened. She folded her hands together, preparing herself for whatever consequence had finally arrived. Gabriel closed the folder before him and rested both hands calmly on the table. How many hours have you worked this week? The question caught her completely off guard. I am not certain, sir. Try. She searched her memory. Perhaps 70 hours. Gabriel studied her quietly. And how many hours have you slept each night? Embarrassment warmed her face. Enough to finish my work, sir. His eyes remained on her for another long moment. That was not my question. Amara hesitated before answering honestly. Usually about 4 hours. The breeze moved gently through the garden, carrying silence between them. Gabriel glanced toward the distant shoreline before speaking again. No employee performs well after pushing beyond human limits. She quickly shook her head. The additional work was my choice. No one asked me to take those shifts. Why? She finally met his eyes. There was no self-pity in her voice, only quiet sincerity. Because my brother graduates next spring. I promised my mother before she passed away that he would never have to leave school because of money. Every extra hour brings him closer to that promise. Gabriel did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the weathered skin around her fingertips, still rough despite expensive soaps and lotions provided throughout the estate. Those hands reflected thousands of unnoticed acts of service performed without expectation of praise. At last he spoke. Beginning tomorrow, you will work a normal schedule. Amara's eyes widened. Sir, I cannot afford fewer hours. Your salary will remain the same. She stared at him, convinced she had misunderstood. I do not understand. Gabriel stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket before looking directly at her. Sometimes the strongest investment is not made in buildings or companies. Sometimes it is made in people who have forgotten they deserve to rest. Before Amara could find the words to respond, he quietly walked toward the mansion, leaving her standing beneath the afternoon sunlight with the untouched teacup beside her and a question she could not answer. Why had the most guarded man she had ever met suddenly begun seeing the one person everyone else had learned to overlook? That evening the mansion settled into its familiar rhythm, elegant on the surface and disciplined beneath it, but quiet changes had already begun spreading through its halls. Employees noticed that Amara was no longer assigned the late-night cleaning rotation. They noticed that Mr. Moretti had personally signed the revised schedule. Most surprising of all, they noticed that no explanation accompanied the decision. In a house where every adjustment carried meaning, silence invited imagination. By the next morning, whispers drifted through the staff dining room more quickly than the aroma of fresh coffee. Some believed the owner had simply rewarded a hardworking employee. Others quietly wondered whether something unusual had happened behind the closed doors of the estate. Amara heard fragments of those conversations as she passed through the hallway, but she lowered her eyes and continued carrying clean towels toward the guest wing. She refused to defend herself against rumors that had never been spoken directly to her. Her mother had once told her that dignity was often measured by the arguments a person chose not to enter. Meanwhile, Gabriel found himself distracted in ways that made little sense even to him. During board meetings, he caught himself thinking about the quiet determination in Amara's voice when she spoke about her younger brother. During lunch, he remembered the careful stitches repairing the cuffs of her uniform instead of replacing it with a new one. Late that afternoon, he opened a locked drawer inside his office, removing a small wooden box that had remained untouched for years. Inside rested an old silver engagement ring and a faded photograph of a smiling woman standing beside him on a windy autumn afternoon. Her name had been Claire. 8 years earlier, she had filled every room with laughter, encouraged him to trust people more easily, and gently challenged the walls he built around himself. Then an unexpected illness had taken her away far sooner than anyone imagined. After losing her, Gabriel had quietly closed every door that led to his heart. He buried himself in work, expanded his companies, supported charities in her memory, and politely turned away every attempt at romance. The bedroom had become the final place where memories remained undisturbed, untouched by anyone else. He believed protecting that room meant protecting the life he had lost. Yet a single exhausted young woman, completely unaware of its meaning, had crossed that invisible line without selfishness, without ambition, and without asking for anything in return. Instead of anger, all he had felt while watching her sleep was a question that refused to disappear. What kind of life forced someone to become so exhausted that even fear could not keep them awake? As evening approached, Gabriel walked through the estate without security for the first time in months. Near the greenhouse, he stopped unexpectedly after hearing quiet laughter. Hidden behind flowering hedges, he saw Amara kneeling beside Mr. Harold Jenkins, the 72-year-old gardener who had worked for the Moretti family longer than Gabriel himself. One of Harold's watering cans had broken, spilling water across the stone pathway. Before anyone else noticed, Amara had already gathered the scattered gardening tools and was helping him replant several young rose bushes damaged by the accident. Harold apologized repeatedly for slowing everyone down, but Amara simply smiled. Flowers do not grow faster because we rush them, she said warmly. Sometimes they only need someone willing to stay a little longer. Harold chuckled softly, grateful for both the help and the kindness behind it. Gabriel remained where he stood, unnoticed beneath the shade of an old oak tree. Those simple words lingered in his thoughts long after the conversation ended. He had spent years believing success depended on moving faster than everyone else. Yet the woman earning the smallest paycheck on his estate seemed to understand something wealth had never taught him. For the first time since Claire's passing, he wondered whether healing did not begin with forgetting the past, but with quietly allowing another good soul to remind him that compassion had always been stronger than fear. The following week arrived with bright mornings and cool evenings, and although the routines inside the Moretti estate appeared unchanged, Gabriel found himself noticing details he had ignored for years. He saw the elderly cook smiling more often because someone quietly helped prepare breakfast before dawn. He noticed fresh flowers appearing in forgotten corners of the mansion where guests rarely walked. Even the security team spoke more respectfully to the maintenance staff after watching Amara greet every employee by name, from the newest groundskeeper to the oldest chauffeur. She never acted as though kindness required recognition. She simply lived that way. Gabriel began adjusting his own schedule without realizing it. Instead of eating lunch during private meetings, he occasionally chose the West Garden, where employees passed on their way between buildings. He never called Amara over, yet their paths crossed naturally more than before. One afternoon, he found her carefully repairing a child's wooden birdhouse that had been donated for an upcoming charity auction. Rather than replacing the cracked piece with an expensive new one, she patiently sanded the rough edges, applied fresh wood glue, and painted over the repaired seam until it became almost invisible. Gabriel stopped beside the workbench. Most people would replace it, he observed. Amara smiled gently without looking up from her work. Sometimes people only see what is broken, sir. I like seeing what can still be saved. Her answer lingered with him long after he returned to his office. Days later, another opportunity revealed even more about her character. A severe summer thunderstorm swept across Chicago, forcing several outdoor workers to seek shelter inside the service building. While everyone waited for the rain to pass, the lights briefly flickered before the backup generators restored power. Some employees complained about the interruption, but Amara quietly disappeared into the kitchen. 20 minutes later, she returned carrying trays of hot coffee, tea, and homemade soup prepared from ingredients already available in the pantry. She moved from person to person, making certain everyone had something warm while insisting the older employees eat first. She did not realize Gabriel had entered through the rear hallway and was watching from a distance. Mrs. Carter approached him with quiet admiration in her voice. She does things like this almost every day, the older woman said softly. She believes people work better when they feel remembered. Gabriel looked around the room. Conversations had become lighter. Laughter replaced frustration. A storm that might have ruined the afternoon instead brought everyone together because one young woman chose generosity over convenience. That evening, Gabriel asked his executive assistant to bring him Amara's employment file, expecting only routine paperwork. Instead, he found letters of recommendation describing her honesty, records showing perfect attendance despite working multiple jobs before joining the estate, and a handwritten note from a former employer. It read, "If kindness could be measured, Miss Brooks would be the wealthiest person I have ever met." Gabriel closed the folder slowly. For years, he had evaluated people by performance reports, financial results, and strategic decisions. None of those documents had ever measured the quiet influence of compassion. The next morning, he passed through the main foyer, just as Amara was helping a delivery driver gather several heavy boxes that had slipped from a cart. The driver repeatedly apologized for the delay, embarrassed by the accident, but Amara only smiled and assured him that difficult mornings happened to everyone. She thanked him for making the delivery safely despite the storm. The man's tense expression softened immediately. After he left, Gabriel realized something remarkable. Every person who spent even a few minutes with Amara seemed to walk away standing a little taller than before. She never changed their circumstances overnight, yet somehow she reminded them of their own worth. As sunlight streamed through the grand entrance, Gabriel understood that what had begun as curiosity was becoming respect, and respect, when quietly nurtured by genuine character, often open doors that power alone could never unlock. Over the next several days, the atmosphere inside the Moretti estate shifted in ways that no one could fully explain. Gabriel never offered special attention in public, yet everyone noticed that he listened whenever Amara spoke. He thanked her when she completed ordinary tasks that had gone unnoticed for years. He even paused to ask older employees whether they needed additional help during busy mornings. Those small changes traveled through the mansion faster than any official announcement. Unfortunately, kindness often attracted suspicion from people who had forgotten how to recognize it. One afternoon, several employees gathered inside the service pantry while preparing for an upcoming charity reception. Their voices remained low, but not low enough. "Have you noticed how Mr. Moretti keeps changing her schedule?" one server whispered. "Nobody receives that kind of treatment without a reason," another answered. A third employee shrugged. "Maybe she knows exactly what she is doing." The words were not shouted, yet they landed with enough weight to wound. Amara had entered the hallway carrying fresh table linens just as the conversation reached her ears. She stopped for only a heartbeat before continuing to walk. She neither defended herself nor confronted anyone inside the room. She simply carried the linens to the ballroom exactly as planned, keeping her expression calm even though disappointment settled quietly inside her heart. Mrs. Carter noticed the change immediately. "Are you feeling well?" she asked later that afternoon. Amara offered a gentle smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "I'm all right. Sometimes people fill silence with stories because they do not know the truth." Mrs. Carter looked at her with quiet admiration. "And sometimes the truth waits patiently because it never needs to shout." Even so, the whispers continued. By evening, they had reached members of the administrative staff and eventually one of Gabriel's executive assistants. During a routine meeting, she cautiously mentioned that employees seemed distracted by growing speculation throughout the estate. Gabriel closed the folder in front of him. "Speculation about what?" The assistant hesitated before answering. "Some believe Miss Brooks has received special treatment for personal reasons rather than professional ones." The room fell completely silent. Gabriel did not raise his voice. He did not display anger. Instead, he slowly stood and walked toward the tall windows overlooking the gardens where several employees were finishing the day's work beneath the fading sunlight. From that distance, he saw Amara helping an elderly housekeeper carry folded banquet linens, even though her own shift had already ended. She expected nothing in return. She probably did not even realize that rumors were spreading because of simple acts of fairness. Gabriel finally turned back toward the meeting table. "Schedule a full staff gathering tomorrow morning in the main ballroom," he said calmly. "Everyone will attend before work begins." The assistant nodded immediately. News of the unexpected meeting spread across the estate before sunset. Employees exchanged uncertain glances, wondering whether layoffs, policy changes, or financial announcements were coming. Amara worried that the gathering existed because of her. She spent most of the evening replaying every conversation she had ever shared with Gabriel, searching for some mistake she might have overlooked. Sleep came only after midnight, and even then it remained light and restless. The following morning, the ballroom filled with housekeepers, gardeners, chefs, chauffeurs, security officers, office staff, and managers standing shoulder to shoulder beneath glittering crystal chandeliers. Soft morning light streamed through towering windows, illuminating anxious faces across the room. Amara quietly took her place near the back beside Mrs. Carter, hoping to remain unnoticed. Moments later, the grand doors opened. Gabriel entered with his usual calm composure, his footsteps measured, his expression impossible to read. He stopped at the front of the room and allowed the silence to settle naturally. Every whisper disappeared. Every eye turned toward him. No one knew that within the next few minutes a single conversation would change far more than the work culture of the Moretti estate. It would reveal the true measure of leadership, and it would force everyone present to reconsider the difference between assumption and dignity. Gabriel allowed the silence to linger until every restless movement in the ballroom disappeared. His gaze moved slowly across the gathered employees before finally settling on the faces that had served the estate with loyalty for many years. "This house has always been built on excellence," he began in a calm, steady voice. "But excellence without respect eventually becomes nothing more than pride." No one spoke. Even the newest employees understood that he was not delivering an ordinary business announcement. He continued, "Recently, I became aware of conversations questioning why one member of this staff received a different work schedule. Those conversations were based on assumptions rather than facts." A quiet uneasiness spread through the room. Several people lowered their eyes. Amara remained motionless near the back, wishing she could disappear into the crowd. Gabriel looked toward her for only a brief moment before addressing everyone again. Miss Brooks did not request special treatment. She did not negotiate for favors. She did not ask for shorter hours. He paused. "I made that decision myself." The room became perfectly still. "Several weeks ago," he continued, "Miss Brooks accidentally entered my private bedroom after working far beyond a reasonable number of hours. She believed she had stepped into an empty guest room. She was so exhausted that she fell asleep almost immediately." A ripple of surprise moved across the ballroom, but Gabriel calmly lifted one hand and silence returned at once. She did not break a rule out of disrespect. She made an honest mistake because she had pushed herself beyond healthy limits while covering additional shifts for this estate. His voice remained measured, yet every word carried unmistakable conviction. "When I found her, I had every authority to wake her immediately. I chose not to. That decision was mine and mine alone." Amara slowly raised her eyes, stunned by what she was hearing. Gabriel continued without hesitation. "The following morning, I reviewed her work record. I learned she had been sacrificing her own rest to support her younger brother's education while continuing to help co-workers without complaint. I adjusted her schedule because rewarding dedication is my responsibility, not because she ever expected recognition." He stepped away from the podium, closing the distance between himself and the employees. "If anyone should be questioned for that decision, question me. Miss Brooks has conducted herself with professionalism, humility, and integrity every single day she has worked here." The weight of his words settled over the ballroom like complete stillness after a storm. Several employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others quietly reflected on conversations they wished they had never joined. Mrs. Carter looked toward Amara with quiet pride while Harold Jenkins gently removed his cap as a sign of respect. Gabriel spoke once more, his voice softer now. "Leadership is not measured by how many people serve you. It is measured by whether the people who serve beside you leave with their dignity intact." He turned toward Amara. "Miss Brooks." She hesitated before stepping forward. "Sir, you have nothing to apologize for." Her eyes filled with emotion, but she remained composed. "Thank you, sir." Gabriel gave a small nod. "No, thank you." Those two simple words echoed through the silent ballroom with greater force than any speech he had ever delivered to investors or executives. In that moment, every person present understood that respect had not been earned through wealth, titles, or authority. It had been earned by quiet character that asked for nothing and gave generously anyway. As morning sunlight poured through the towering windows, the whispers that had once followed Amara disappeared completely, replaced by something far more powerful. One by one, employees who had doubted her lowered their heads, not because anyone demanded it, but because genuine dignity had a way of revealing the truth without ever raising its voice. Several months passed, and autumn slowly painted the trees surrounding the Moretti estate with shades of amber and crimson. The mansion itself remained as elegant as ever, yet those who walked its halls understood that something far more valuable than polished marble or priceless artwork had quietly changed. Conversations carried greater kindness. New employees were welcomed instead of judged. Managers began asking whether their teams needed support instead of simply expecting perfection. The change had not come from new policies or expensive renovations. It had begun with one exhausted young woman whose quiet integrity reminded an entire household what respect truly looked like. Amara continued living much as she always had. She still arrived before sunrise, greeted every employee with genuine warmth, and never sought recognition for the countless thoughtful things she did each day. The difference was that she no longer carried every burden alone. Coworkers who once whispered now volunteered to help when the workload became heavy. Harold proudly told visitors that the brightest flowers on the estate bloomed because Miss Brooks always believed they deserved another chance. Even Mrs. Carter admitted she had never seen the staff so united in all her years serving the Moretti family. One crisp October afternoon, a letter arrived from the University of Illinois. Amara stepped outside into the quiet garden before opening it, her hands trembling with hope. Her younger brother had officially completed his engineering degree with honors and had accepted his first full-time position. She closed her eyes for a moment as tears of gratitude gathered quietly. The promise she had made to her mother had finally been fulfilled. She did not notice Gabriel approaching until he stopped beside the fountain. "Good news?" he asked gently. She smiled, brighter than he had ever seen before. "My brother graduated, sir. He starts his new job next month." Gabriel's expression softened. "Then today deserves celebrating." She laughed quietly. "Knowing he has the future my mother dreamed of is already more than enough." They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the fountain and the rustling leaves carried by a cool breeze across the gardens. After a long moment, Gabriel spoke again. "There is something I have wanted to show you." He led her through the mansion without another word until they reached the familiar hallway she had once entered by accident. He opened the bedroom door, but instead of inviting her inside immediately, he paused with one hand resting against the frame. The room looked different now. Fresh sunlight poured through opened curtains. The air no longer felt frozen in memory. A framed photograph of Claire remained on the bookshelf, honored rather than hidden, surrounded by fresh white lilies. Gabriel looked at the photograph before quietly speaking. "For years I believed keeping this room unchanged meant I was protecting the people I loved." He turned toward Amara with calm sincerity. "I finally realized I was only protecting my loneliness." She listened without interrupting. He smiled, not with sadness, but with peace. "The night you accidentally fell asleep here, I thought someone had crossed the one boundary I could never allow. Instead, you reminded me that kindness never asks permission before changing a life." Amara lowered her eyes, humbled by words she never expected to hear. Gabriel reached into his pocket and placed a small antique brass key in her hand. "This is not a key to my bedroom," he said. "It is the key to the new community learning center our foundation just finished renovating. I would like you to oversee its volunteer program because you understand something that cannot be taught in business schools." She looked at the key in disbelief. "Why me?" Gabriel answered with the same quiet certainty that had transformed the estate months before. "Because every place becomes a better home after you walk through its doors." Amara gently closed her fingers around the key, grateful not for the opportunity itself, but for the trust behind it. As golden afternoon light filled the hallway, the walls that had once guarded grief now welcomed hope instead. And on that peaceful day, everyone whose life had been touched by their unlikely friendship remembered that true dignity is never measured by power, wealth, or status, but by the quiet courage to see the humanity in another person before seeing anything else.